Title: NYC's Most Dangerous Jail, Voices from Inside Rikers Island. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. The island that time forgot. Long before the headlines, before the public outrage, and before the city promised a shutdown that never seemed to come, Rikers Island already had a reputation whispered across New York's boroughs like a warning. If you end up there, you might not come back the same. Rikers Island is not just a jail. It's a 413-acre isolated complex floating between the Bronx and Queens, connected by a single narrow bridge that separates New Yorkers from one of the most violent jail systems in America. For decades, it has been called the Island of No Second Chances, a place where time doesn't move forward, it freezes. Days blur. Nights stretch. Lives break. For many inmates, the nightmare begins the moment the transport bus rumbles across the Rikers Bridge. The Manhattan skyline fades behind them, and a cold metal door slams shut in front of them. Inside the intake area, a crowded hallway known as the bullpens, men sleep on the floor, pressed against each other, still wearing the same clothes they were arrested in. The smell of sweat, metal, and disinfectant clings to the air, and no one is given clear answers about how long they'll wait. Hours? Days? No one knows. Some say you can feel the violence in the walls, thick, heavy, almost alive. Once inside the housing units, chaos becomes routine. Rikers is divided into multiple facilities, each meant to separate inmates by age, gender, or behavior. But in reality, the lines blur. Gang members from rival sets sometimes end up in the same dorm. Inmates with mental health issues share cells with men who haven't slept in days. Young detainees, many just 18 or 19, are thrown into units where older inmates have already learned how to control the room. Inside the dorms, the first rule is simple: find protection or become a target. A former inmate named Jerome told investigators, "You don't walk into Rikers. You survive Rikers." He remembered his first week, waking up to a fight so violent that blood splattered across the wall like paint. The guards called a code 1, but by the time backup arrived, it was already too late. The injured inmate lay on the floor gasping for air. Stories like that are not rare. They are routine. Rikers has seen suicides inside solitary cells, inmates beaten into comas, and detainees who died waiting for medical help that never arrived. In 2022 alone, 19 people died in custody, the highest number in decades. Mothers, activists, and lawmakers demanded answers, but nothing changed fast enough. One of the darkest corners of Rikers is the notorious West facility, where inmates with medical issues or infectious diseases were once held. A former detainee described lying on a broken mattress, hearing rats scratching inside the walls, and begging for a shower for 3 days. Across the island, in the boat, a barge-like jail floating on the East River, detainees complained of overcrowding so extreme that some slept inches from the toilet. Every whistleblower, every officer, every inmate shares the same truth. Rikers Island is broken, and has been for decades. But the island's violence isn't just inmate on inmate. Officers, often overworked and understaffed, are pushed beyond exhaustion. Many have gone on record saying they handled multiple units alone, sometimes 50 or 60 men, because staff shortages left them with no backup. When fights break out, officers must choose: break it up and risk being stabbed, or wait for help that may never come. Many say they live every shift in fear. One former correction officer admitted, "If you're not scared in Rikers, you're lying." And yet, thousands of New Yorkers pass through this island every year, most still awaiting trial, not convicted. Legally innocent, still treated like lifers. The haunting part? Some never make it home. Families have received phone calls saying their sons died from medical complications, only to discover later that their children were beaten or left unsupervised for hours. Mothers have stood outside the Rikers Bridge holding candles, begging the city to close the jail, and every year the date gets pushed further away. Rikers Island is not a fictional horror story. It's real. It's raw. And the voices inside speak of a system on the edge of collapse. And this is only the beginning. Rikers Island is often described by officials as a correctional facility. But according to the people who have lived behind its bars, the truth is far darker. If Chapter 1 revealed the island's chaos, Chapter 2 reveals its voices, the men and women who experienced Rikers from the inside, and carry its trauma long after they leave. The inmate who never made it home. One of the most heartbreaking stories connected to Rikers Island is that of Kalief Browder, a 16-year-old arrested for a theft he maintained he never committed. Too poor to afford bail, he spent nearly 3 years on Rikers while awaiting trial. For nearly half that time he was kept in solitary confinement. Kalief's own words still haunt New York today. Every time I went back in the cell, I felt like I was getting deeper into a hole. He was beaten by inmates. He was beaten by officers. He was starved, isolated, and forgotten. When his case was finally dismissed and he was released, the psychological damage was already permanent. He took his own life in 2015, sparking national outrage and pushing activists to demand Rikers be closed once and for all. Kalief's tragedy became a symbol, a warning that Rikers is not just unsafe, it's deadly. The system buckling under pressure. Inside Rikers today, correction officers describe the same fear as the inmates. Many compare the job to working in a war zone. One officer, speaking anonymously, said, "You don't know which inmate is going to snap or which officer is going to break. You're constantly alert, constantly afraid." Staffing shortages have turned chaos into routine. Some days, one officer must control 60 or 70 inmates. When a fight breaks out, they often have only seconds to react, and no backup. Rikers at times becomes a place where no one is truly in control. Not the guards, not the wardens, not the city. Mental health crisis inside the island. Nearly 50% of all people held on Rikers struggle with mental health issues. But despite the need, mental health services are severely strained. One former inmate described seeing a man pacing in circles for hours, muttering to himself, hallucinating voices that told him to harm himself, yet he received no help. Another detainee spent weeks asking for medication that never came. He told reporters, "You either break silently or you break loudly. But either way, this place breaks you." In a jail where thousands are awaiting trial, legally innocent, untreated mental illness becomes a pipeline to tragedy. Many suicides at Rikers occur in units where inmates were already flagged as vulnerable, but never properly monitored. Women's voices, a fight to survive. Rikers also houses the Rose M. Singer Center, a facility for women often called Rosies. But the stories from Rosies are just as harrowing. A former detainee recalled, "You sleep with one eye open. You shower with one eye open. Everything is a threat." Women reported delays in medical care, overcrowded dorms, vermin infestation, lack of hygiene products, assaults from both inmates and staff. One mother described giving birth while shackled, despite federal guidelines advising against it. Another remembered being denied basic sanitary pads, resorting to old clothes instead. Their stories paint a picture of a jail system struggling and failing to protect the most vulnerable. "I thought I would die there," a teenager's testimony. Jeremiah was just 18 when he was sent to Rikers for a minor parole violation. His first night, he watched 3 inmates fight over a phone. The next week, he saw a man stabbed with a broken broom handle. He said, "Rikers is not a jail. It's a world where you learn how to be scared of everything." Jeremiah witnessed more violence in 6 months than most people see in their entire lives. When he was released, he couldn't sleep without checking the corners of his room. Rikers had followed him home. Why this matters? The voices tell the truth. These stories aren't isolated. They're part of a pattern, a system overwhelmed by understaffing, overcrowding, mental health emergencies, slow court processing, inadequate resources. And through all of it, the voices of the inmates echo the same message. We are human beings. Don't forget us. Rikers Island is filled with people who haven't been convicted of anything. Yet they are exposed to trauma, violence, and suffering that will scar them for life. And for many, the island becomes the last place they ever see. Rikers Island has been called a place beyond reform. For decades, New York City promised change, and for decades, Rikers continued to swallow people alive. Uncovers one final truth. Why does a jail with so much suffering still exist? And what happens next? The 2017 promise? We will close Rikers. In 2017, then Mayor Bill de Blasio announced what many activists had been fighting for years to hear. Rikers Island would be closed. The plan was bold: replace the aging violent complex with 4 smaller, modern borough jails. The entire system, they argued, would become safer, more humane, and closer to the communities detainees come from. But years passed. Administrations changed. Budgets shifted. And Rikers remained open. By 2023, conditions had actually become worse. The highest number of jail deaths in decades. Record staffing shortages. Record levels of self-harm. Record levels of assaults on both officers and inmates. Advocates said the system was collapsing. The city said they needed more time. Meanwhile, hundreds of people continued to enter Rikers every single week. The death crisis, It should not cost a life to await trial. Since 2020, more than 50 people have died in Rikers custody or shortly after release. Many were awaiting trial, legally innocent, simply unable to afford bail. Some died from medical neglect. Some died from suicide. Some died from withdrawal complications, detoxing without proper medical supervision. One of the most haunting cases is that of Brandon Rodriguez, a 25-year-old arrested for a domestic dispute. Placed in a mental observation unit, he repeatedly asked for help. Correction staff reported he was crying, anxious, and unstable. A few days later he was found dead, alone in a shower stall. His mother said he needed help, not a death sentence. Another name, Esmond Green, died after begging for asthma medication. Medical staff said he looked fine. Hours later he was gone. For families, the heartbreak is doubled. Not only do they lose someone they love, they must live knowing it happened in a jail where the person wasn't even convicted. Officers speak out, "We're outnumbered, overworked, afraid." For many correction officers, Rikers has become a job they no longer feel safe doing. One officer described being responsible for an entire housing unit alone. "If a fight breaks out, I'm helpless. I'm screaming for backup that never comes." Sick calls skyrocketed because officers were exhausted, mentally broken, or scared to return. Rikers became a cycle. Short staffing leads to less supervision. Less supervision leads to more violence. More violence leads to more officers calling out, which leads to even less supervision. It is a system locked in its own downfall. Even union leaders admitted, no one is safe. Not staff. Not inmates. Not medical. No one. The federal takeover threat, a turning point. By 2022, conditions were so bad that federal officials considered placing Rikers under full federal control, a rare and drastic move. A federal monitor overseeing the jail released reports detailing deep-seated cultural dysfunction, rampant violence and abuse, unconstitutional conditions, failure to protect detainees. The city pushed back, saying improvements were being made, but the evidence was overwhelming. Rikers was collapsing faster than reforms could be implemented. The monitor wrote, "The harm individuals experience on Rikers is deeply destabilizing and, in many cases, life-altering. The people forgotten, and the people fighting back. While the system struggles, many voices continue to fight for change." Former inmates, they are the first to say that Rikers must close. They speak in community meetings, testify at city hearings, and tell their stories online. One man said, "If you want to understand why Rikers is broken, look at who gets sent there. The poor, the mentally ill, people who need help, not trauma. Families, mothers march with photos of sons lost to neglect. Sisters demand answers at press conferences. Fathers ask why their sons died waiting for court. Their message is unanimous. Rikers is beyond reform. Reformers, organizations like the Closed Rikers Coalition, Legal Aid Society, and Bronx Defenders continue to push for a system that is smaller, fair, less reliant on pretrial detention. They argue that jails should not be warehouses for people society doesn't know what to do with. The truth no one wants to admit. Rikers Island remains open not because it works, but because closing it is a political, logistical, and financial nightmare. To shut it down, New York must build new facilities, reduce the jail population, reform courts, increase mental health services, modernize infrastructure, train thousands of staff, and stand firm against political backlash. And yet, despite all obstacles, one thing is undeniable. If Rikers stays open, more people will die, more families will suffer, and New York will continue operating one of the most dangerous jails in America. Rikers is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by stories, by the people who didn't survive, by the people who did survive but were never the same, and by the people entering those gates right now, stepping into a place the city has promised, again and again, to close.